Alright, so it's been like 3 weeks. I did some vacation, right? I went international for 3 weeks. It was hard to get to the gym. I only had like 4 gym days there. And I did a crazy cut throughout the entire vacation because like it's hard to get protein in. So instead of bulking up, like I just chose not to eat. So I still like do something, right? Now, I did get a camcorder in my old videos. My phone camera was broken, so it didn't really look that good. So I bought a $60 camcorder, and the video's not that bad, but what is bad is the audio processing. So just bad news for me in the future is that I'm gonna have to have a separate audio file for every video that I make because the audio coming from the actual camcorder is absolutely horrible even when you put a wireless mic on it. I know this is a huge change of pace from like what I normally do and crap, but since I lost like so much strength, I don't have it in me to film myself for at least like the next 2 weeks in the gym. This whole video is going to be about the perspective that determinists have onto the topic of free will. The thing is, it's very weird and absurd when you think that like when people say that you don't have free will. You could say right now that you can do whatever you want, such as like pick something up or do something completely crazy like scream at someone just for like the fun of it and say that as like evidence that we have free will. One could also say that the ability to change your life completely around out of the blue is also a sign of free will, such as someone focusing on their physical health and going to the gym, or an addict going to rehab. However, not only does the determinist perspective on the debate of free will answer those questions, it's also convincing to believe that life is predetermined and provides like an interesting perspective on how to live your life with that knowledge. When you think that life has no free will, you're like what's the point? It actually has a pretty good response to that. To go over the basics of how determinism explains behavior, it holds that all decisions arise from a complex system of brain states, genetics, experiences, and environment inputs. It sounds like a mouthful, but in simple terms, it says that you are born with a given thought process. This thought process is how you react to your environment, and this environment creates experiences for you. These experiences end up adapting your thought process for the future. So you're born with a given thought process, you're born with your perspective in the world of how you learn things, of what's your poison and like what you find funny or something. And then just based off the experiences where you react using that thought process, you're also adapting your thought process for the future. So that just shows the role that the environment has. Of course, determinists believe in the chaos theory in the sense that what seems completely random, such as free will, can be explained by a crazy amount of factors and underlying causes. So in terms of behavior, determinism applies all the knowledge that we currently have, going from hormones and neural architecture to explain like your thought process, how your brain reacts, all the way down to quantum noise making sufficient enough change in your environment to create a change in your behavior, right? So they go really deep into this. The environment does not need to be immediate. In fact, it can be a myriad of factors which end up creating more factors, like feelings or unconscious thoughts to which your own body reacts to. Now, what I mean by this is that environment and even certain responses to environment become the input for your new responses. So you can kind of get it that like if an environment causes you to be bored, then that boredom is also going to be input for your next responses. This can either be a reaction to a slap from your parents and to make you learn a lesson, or it can be a combination of unconscious thoughts and feelings combined with exposure to something specific in your environment which you may not even notice consciously. It doesn't even need to be in your conscious thoughts for you to respond to it, which affects your decision making. Now, one of the most important big thoughts of the determinist view on free will is that if a certain part of your environment were to change, then a behavior that you would have emitted would have never happened, which furthermore strengthens the argument on the illusion of free will. So they're saying that like if you do something because of an environment, then if that environment never happened, you never did that. And if you never did that, you were never really free to choose to do that on your own. Everyone knows the quote, cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. People put it in their own way, right? And use it as proof of free will. I think, therefore I have free will. Now that's the mindset that a lot of people have. However, it assumes you make thoughts using free will to prove free will. This explains the fallacy that many people have about their own free will, because like the determinist view is that it's an illusion. It's your brain disguising your response to your unconscious thoughts as a form of I want to do this, when in reality it's just a bunch of complex equations going on in your head which just return one type of response. Now, going back to my earlier examples, you can say that you can do something for no reason and have that as proof of free will. However, that can simply be explained by the myriad of factors mentioned before of environment that go through your brain to create that response. Now, to apply this knowledge, I'm gonna do a little bit of an example for everyone here. I gotta This is a My Little Pony Reese's plush, all right? And then this is a My Little Pony Symbiote plush. This is high quality plush, all right? Forget that knowledge, all right? Here's Pinkie Pie and here's Derpy Hoods, all right? Or Muffins. Now, that's her like legal name. Derpy was talking about this concept to Pinkie Pie, right? Pinkie Pie refutes what Derpy says and states that she can do whatever she wants, such as throw this muffin. You see this muffin? Pinkie Pie said she can throw it, and it's gonna make a mess in everywhere that she's gonna have to clean up later. She did that for no reason. So why would she do that if not for free will? And that's just how Pinkie Pie refutes what Derpy's saying. But little does Pinkie Pie know that if it weren't for Derpy saying that free will's fake, she would have never tested what she's saying. And not only that, but going more into the unconscious thoughts. I mean, like, you wouldn't throw a muffin to prove that free will isn't fake, but she would throw the muffin simply because of her unconscious thoughts in her brain. So I'm gonna go like even deeper into here about describing why she did that specific thing. So enough of my rambling. I'm going to explain this pretty simple. Why would you prove free will is real by throwing a muffin, right? I'm gonna go more into not why she proved free will, but why she threw a muffin. Because if someone told you free will isn't real, you wouldn't throw a muffin, or you wouldn't throw anything to make a mess later on. Now, it could just be a combination that Pinkie Pie was a little bit annoyed by Derpy, or that Pinkie Pie remembered that Derpy likes muffins and that somehow correlated into her brain to say, hey, muffins, I should use that to prove free will. So that just goes to show about just how unconscious thoughts that Pinkie Pie, she probably wasn't even thinking of like muffins or Derpy, right? She just wanted to think about how can I prove free will. And because of the unconscious thinking of muffins by correlating it to Derpy, that just made her decide to prove free will using a muffin. Now, this sounds crazy stupid, but you can get the idea about how these thoughts come into action by the unconscious. And this just happens so much, all right? This crazy chain reaction in your brain happens so much that you don't even realize it. Going over the topic of experiencing change, mentioned that in the beginning, I have another example where Derpy is homeless, is a homeless pony. She lives in the streets and she's crazy addicted. Hold on. And Derpy is crazy addicted to edible muffins. This is through a series of unfortunate events. We're not going to talk about how she got to that situation. But one day, even more unfortunate events unfolded for her. It rained heavily, she got caught trying to steal from a gas station, and a savage dog chased her down. So overall, she's having a bad day. And then she finds a full stash of edible muffins. Like, I'm talking about 100 of these, all right? 100 edible muffins. Imagine how nice that'd be to just like find 100 things of whatever you're addicted to. While you're having a bad day, you think that like that's some type of like divine miracle right there. Holy crap, I'm having a bad day and something that makes me feel happy is just right there in front of me. So Derpy takes out all of her pent-up aggression, right, on the muffins, and she eats all 100 edible muffins in one sitting. Now, that led to an overdose, all right? So right now Derpy's like seizing on the side, right? And she almost dies. That is when someone finds her, calls the ambulance, and she gets treatment that she needs to heal. At that moment, Derpy changed, because like, that's really scary to almost die, especially knowing that you're gonna die from eating a bunch of muffins in a regular bad day that you had. After that, Derpy went to rehab, Derpy got a better education, And Derpy started teaching all these little kids about like, hey, don't take drugs because like that's gonna mess you up. I was lucky to survive, right? So basically she turned her life around and her life is amazing. Now, what happened if that overdose never happened? What I'm saying is that maybe if in that day it didn't rain so badly, if she wasn't caught trying to steal from a gas station, or if the savage dog didn't chase her down, what if she never found that stash of muffins? Then she would never take out her aggression on the muffins, and that whole overdose would never happen in the first place, and therefore she would never turn her life around. So then she's just gonna stay the same. Now, what I'm trying to say here, how this connects to free will, is that how can you say that you have free will if you can have a change so big happen only because of your environment? Because if that never happened, then that whole change never happened, and she was never free to change. That happened just as a response. Now you may think, so if we don't have free will and life is predetermined, what's the point? And that is where determinism gives an interesting yet ironic answer. And that being that life has no inherent meaning and therefore you do whatever you will. That's the ironic part, doing whatever you will. Now to explain this, it's kind of like saying that although you're not free to choose your will, that's still your will and you always seem justified to yourself because you understand yourself. And those experiences that made you never happened to anyone else. So it's just best to ride that wave, you know? Now, not only that, however, when you believe in free will, you believe that people do bad things simply because they will to be bad. While determinism shows that everyone is the same, the only difference is being that they were exposed to different environments and experiences. So that just like provides a whole different level of understanding. Now, there are some problems that arise when believing in determinism, and that being the fact that determinism attempts to fully explain actuality and existence using the knowledge we have right now. So for me, determinism represents trying to explain existence with just logic and highlights the need of faith to explain the infinite. That's kind of like my view on determinism. Now, of course, just like what Kant's skepticism states, our knowledge will never be enough to explain the infinite. Whereas we may be correct about physical causation, however, we cannot answer anything above that physical causation, which will be needed to explain existence. As our knowledge grows, it will just be like a limit function to explaining the infinite, right? Like imagine, close your eyes right now and imagine a little calculus limit function. As time passes, our x value gets greater and we understand more and more. However, we'll never be able to really comprehend infinite, no matter how far we go up. To go more into depth, determinism assumes that free will does not exist simply because free will needs to be assumed to exist. The thing about faith is that when you apply that to philosophical ideas, to explain infinite or supernatural values, you need to assume. Not only that, when it comes to brain processes, we explain the brain using the knowledge we currently have without knowing how the brain works 100%. Therefore, we make assumptions that everything is a simple environment and response impact simply due to the fact that that's all like the findings have told us so far. So in reality, there could be a way that the brain communicates to that supernatural side where you have free will. To go deeper into free will, I'm just gonna like explain this concept. I'm using the libertarian's perspective on free will, in which it is a supernatural value, because that's how I kind of see free will. And I'll go later into why it transcends physical causation, like unlike what compatibilists thinks. Now, the reason why we are not using the compatibilist definition of free will in this scenario is due to the fact that compatibilists believe that free will is physical. Now, compatibilists believe that free will is completely physical and that it's a response to your environment. However, it comes from roots of your own desires, and that's what makes it free will. However, then you go into this whole thing where it clashes with determinism, in which if your will is from the result of an environment, no matter what was used to process it, in the end of the day, if the environment never happened, then the action and the change would never happen in the first place either. which goes against the whole concept of free will in the first place. I have yet another example that makes it easy to comprehend. Now, this example is more of a hypothetical experiment that needs to happen in order to state that free will either exists or it doesn't. Now, let's say you have these two are two absolutely genetically identical, not a single protein strand different, not a single electron different in their systems, right? And this was created using some super sci-fi advanced CRISPR technology. These twins are then separated and under the care of robots in a completely similar environment where not even the smallest bacteria on the ground is different or quantum noise is different. These robots go through the exact same processes at the same time. This way, assuming both have the same exact given thought process, like in terms of twins, and environment, the smallest factors down to random neural firing should be the same, assuming that everything is 100% similar. They could only be different through supernatural free will. All right, this is saying that free will is supernatural because when you have every physical detail controlled, the only thing that can change is a value that's supernatural, that value being free will. Now, if the babies end up the same, then that supports the idea that free will does not exist, or it's in a form in which it cannot even be called free will due to its dependence on physical, environmental factors. Whereas if the babies were to end up different, then that means that free will does indeed exist, and it's also a supernatural value. Overall, determinism does bring good arguments into the whole mess that is the never-ending debate on free will. However, fails to deliver due to the fact that they try to understand infinite using finite knowledge. Now you can live in peace knowing that you'll never know for sure if you have free will or not.